power to the equites to become judiciaries and to, to look after what is known as the corruption in the provinces, as well as to, he removes the age of conscription so that no one younger than 17 can be conscripted, or 17 years old can be conscripted. And he starts saying that the state should pay for the military equipment of soldiers, because that was a huge reason for why the land issue grows, because people had to sell their lands to get money to become soldiers for their equipment. So he states that the state should spend for the armor of the soldiers. So all this kind of earns him the anger of the patrician class and the senatorial class. And what happens then, obviously, is that they get angry. Well, they get angry and they start issuing this thing called the Senatus Consulatum Ultimum in 121. And it's basically giving extraordinary powers to the council to find what he thinks are descendants of Rome or people who will destroy the Roman Republic and kill them without any issues, basically, without any repercussions, because it's otherwise murder to kill a Roman citizen. And so the consul, Elopinius, sets a bounty on Gaius Gracchus' head, and Gaius Gracchus is forced to flee and he dies, basically. There is versions where he's killed by suicide or slave, but essentially it ends up with his death, and again about another 3,000 of his followers who were supporting him. So before I move on to the results, you need to know what the differences between the brothers' reforms actually mean, the land reform. So as we said, Tiberius was an idealist. So that meant even though he managed to put the proposal for the land commission through, he didn't think of the practical aspects, like how he's going to fund it or anything. So he actually did an unconstitutional thing by putting a law allowing him to use the king of Pergamon's treasury. But what Gaius did, where he allowed the publicus to collect state revenue and use it for the commission, was actually not unconstitutional. And because of that, he was able to basically fund his own commission or his commission through the state itself, right? And that was why he's considered the more practical of the brothers. And then, of course, he does other things like the corn law and the formation of colonies. And these are extremely important because he basically takes out all these things that lead to the situation in Rome, where people are poor and the rich are rich. And he manages to basically remove the causes for it, because obviously otherwise it can happen again and again. But after the deaths of both the Gracchi, most of their laws do get repealed or removed, right? But they have a lasting influence on later reformers. So from 121 onwards, actually, we see many Roman citizens actually enacting grain laws that were started with the Gracchi. So we have Octavius in 78 BC. There is another Lex Frumentaria. Then Claudius does one. And Cato the Younger, Pompey, and even Julius Caesar enacts grain laws in the later years in order to help the Roman citizens and basically feed the poor. Then we also have this changing political landscape. This is especially visible during the later Republic, because people suddenly realize the power the tribunes have. Because until then, while they knew that the laws could be passed through the People's Assembly, they didn't actually realize how much power it gave the people. And so, and also they realized how important agriculture was, like agrarian laws were, because what the Gracchi did with the agrarian laws made them very popular with the Roman citizens. And so because of that, they learned that the people's opinion could be swayed by laws that actually help them, like this agrarian law. And so agrarian laws becomes a huge part, like for later reformers, like I mentioned, because of this reason, because it makes them popular. And of course, there is the other less good side of it, which is, for instance, the killing of these tribunes. So Tiberius's death especially was very graphic because it was held during the re-election of the tribunes when he was trying to get re-election that election day, because they came and beat him with cudgels at that place itself in the Senate. And it becomes common in Rome for you to get rid of your political opponents by killing them. And it's something that we see throughout the Republic, later period of the Republic, where there is huge bloodshed. We see it in Sulla's conscription, in Marius's. So that becomes a part of the Gracchi's influence as well. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. Over to you, Ms. Samanthi.
Thank you very much, Briony. All right, so then I think we'll move on to the next one. If there are any questions about the agrarian reforms and the Gracchi Brothers, or anything that you would like to clarify, we can do it like we did yesterday at the question and answer session. So I'll move on to the next topic, which is on wasps, Aristophanes Wasps, a laugh at contemporary judiciary and politics. So let me share the screen. I hope you can see my screen. Okay. The W should be capital here. All right, so let's jump to the discussion. So a laugh at contemporary judiciary and politics, Aristophanes Wasps. So Aristophanes Wasps is a comedy. But within that comedy, within that laughter and all of that, there's a lot of criticism and a lot of other discussions that are going on. And we have two acts in the book. The first part mostly focusing on the judiciary and political side of things, and the second part more on social criticism. So today, when we are talking about the contemporary judiciary and the politics of this play, we will be mainly focusing on the first part or the first act of the play. So I know you already studied comedy, but I'll quickly touch on some basic things about old comedy that will lead up to the discussion on this particular topic. So the first question is, how did Aristophanes manage to laugh? So this might sound a little an abstract question. So the idea is, we have two genres of comedy, right? Within comedy, we have old comedy and we have new comedy. And when you study, we later also talk about Terence, who is coming under new comedy. When you study both the parts, you will see that there's a distinct difference in the subject material of old comedy and that of new comedy. In all comedy, you will be looking at wasps. So you see political satire, social criticism, famous people are targeted at. But in new comedy, taking Terence for example, it's very domestic. It's a personal issue inside one family. It doesn't have national importance. It does talk about the city-state in a very micro level, but it doesn't talk about the politics or the economy of the state. It's just one family, Pamphilus' family and its issues. So when it comes to old comedy, we have, like I said, political satire, directly mentioning political personalities. The very names, Anticleon, Procleon, they're very direct. And then the old comedy might also talk about taboos. We don't really have it in Wasps, but in some other place of old comedy, we have that as well. So the question, going back to this, how did someone manage to do this? How can someone openly criticize a particular political setting or political regime, a person, without having repercussions. So the answer to this you might find here, democracy or the democratic setting. I wrote these two examples, hoping you're familiar with both or at least one of them. So on the left side of the screen is the it's a very famous Sri Lankan political satire. And on the right side of the screen is Trevor Noah, one of the leading stand-up comedians who is very direct about political criticism and satire. So just to give you an idea of how satire and criticism can function in a democratic setting. Because you're targeting a whole regime, you're targeting a whole group of people, which you will see when you move on to the Roman Empire, for example, you can't do because there's only one ruler, there's an emperor. So if you're criticizing, let's say, a law, you're criticizing the man himself, which is a direct critique or an insult, and that can have repercussions, which is why most of the Roman comedians comic writers, they focus on something safer, personal issues, domestic issues, without actually naming, not like Aristophanes, not as daring as Aristophanes. So the democratic setting enabled Aristophanes to talk about all these people, all these issues more openly and to laugh at it. So when you're talking about laughter here, I'm not only going to talk about the surface level humor where you'll actually laugh as a part of the audience or the reader, but a dark sense of humor as well, a laughter at the setting. So I'll go to that in a minute. And then the other one, so if you look at the context of this play, it's been written in a time of crisis for Athens. Athens is going through a war. It has gone through the Persian War. It has emerged victorious. We talked about it yesterday. Victorious as in they came out as the leaders. But then a few years later, they moved on to the Peloponnesian War where they are taking a hit. So Aristophanes writes in this context where there is political instability and also Athenians are struggling a little. And this crisis situation is another reason it becomes another reason or another situation where he writes. Again, I'll bring you a couple of examples that you can yourself relate to. These are both from COVID. These are memes during COVID, and we all lived through that. So look at how we made fun. The one on the left, this was circulated internationally. One on right, this was circulated in Sri Lanka. Both have humor, right? And now COVID was these were also shared at the very initial stages of it. So we were scared. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know how it's going to end. But in that time of crisis, there was some sense of release through this humor. So humor or laughter in times of tragedy or in time of crisis is another context in which Aristophanes writes. So that's why I said some of these, when I said laughter, some of the instances are really dark. It's not light-hearted humor. There's a dark layer to it as well. Some of them are slapstick humor or the surface level humor. Okay, so let's divide the topic up, laugh at contemporary judiciary system and then a contemporary politics. So I'll go through a few examples under both sections. And then in the discussion, if you have any questions, we'll talk about them there. So the first example is the scene where the jurors are going to court to seek revenge. So first of all, that's the opening, not the opening, the section right after Xanthias and Sosias' dream. We have the leader, the chorus, dressed as wasps, walking towards Procleon's house to collect him and go to the law courts. And in the discussion that follows, we see that they have an agenda already. They know what they're going to do in the court. They know that they're going to get back at this particular person. So usually when we look at the judiciary system, ideally, it's supposed to hear out the case, hear out the defendant also, and then use evidence and then decide the outcome, right? But when you look at this play and the wasps, you can see that they've already decided. They already know what's going to happen. And then they just go there, just listen to the defendant and just pass the sentence that they have already come to an agreement on. So there is a laugh, like Aristophanes is mocking this whole situation where personal vendetta or personal agendas have seeped into the judiciary system. So I show you one quote. We'll come back to this underlined sentence later under a different theme as well. So here, this is what the leader says. It's last case up for trial today. So these names, they are very directly associated with the contemporary politicians that were there during the Peloponnesian War. It's last case up for trial today, don't forget. And they say he's got a mint of money tucked away, you know. So we'll come back to this mint of money situation with the mock quote later. And the great protector. So this is Cleon. Come in good time, he said, with 3 days ration of bad temper in your knapsacks. That's what Cleon said. So the jurors already come angry at Laches. They already are decided against Laches. So this is Aristophanes using these lines. What he's doing is he's mocking the whole judiciary system itself and these jurors and their mindset, saying, look, what is the point of this system? They've already decided. And the term great protector, so they're already with Cleon. We come back to Cleon and that part of it in a bit. But so this is one way he's laughing at these judiciary offices. And then pro-Cleon, when he's talking with the leader and the wasps, he's saying, he, that is anti-Cleon, won't allow me to go to court. He won't let me do any harm to anybody. So there is a certain humor in it, right? Pro-Cleon goes to court because he's bored at home and he can use his power, his quote-unquote power, and have some fun hurting someone. So that is the idea. He won't let me hurt. He won't let me do harm to anybody. So this has a certain sense of humor where we are given the impression that the jurors harm people, or instead of actually delivering justice, this line kind of has a different idea, right? A different approach. Moving on. The other one is how the sentences are already decided. I already touched on this a little, but this is another. Yeah. No, this is the wrong place. This should come later. So I already touched on it. The sentences are already decided, so they know what they are going to do. We'll look at it closely in the mock quote scene as well. I'll come back to this quote later. And then demagogues and sophistry. So here we'll come back to this again with the dreams of Sosias and Centias. But here in the quote that I said, the great protector yesterday said so and so on. So here also, the great protector is Cleon, and Aristophanes is laughing at how he has already spoken to the jurors and the jury, the jury, and he has already told them what to do. So we know that sophistry as a discipline and demagogues as a group of people were dominating the democratic setting of Athens at the time. So I think Punsilo touched on democracy yesterday, and especially with the law courts being democratized at a certain point in the evolution of Athenian democracy, the ability to speak properly had a lot of impact on the outcome of the sentence. So it's basically about whether you can convince the jury that you are innocent. That became the whole situation when the jury got democratized, as in when a lot of people could vote in the jury, because then you are basically trying to convince the majority to vote in your favor, right? And then there's another layer to it. Here we have politicians coming in, or in this case, a demagogue or a speaker, and convincing the jury prior to a trial that they should favor him and not his opponent. So imagine you have a trial tomorrow and you have an opponent that you'd like to defeat. So you go and you meet all the jury members and say, you know what, vote for me or pass the sentence in my favor. And then they go in the next day and they do what? So this is manipulation at its worst possible scenario. And Aristophanes is laughing at this whole situation. This is supposed to be a democracy. This is supposed to be, just and all of that. But here we have someone who is good with words manipulating the whole thing. And here, coming back to the quote I skipped, This is Anti-Cleon talking about this idea of democracy. He's saying, I can't go anywhere without hearing about this whole democracy and without being accused of being a conspirator or a monarchist. So this kind of gives us the idea that at that point, monarchist or a dictator, not a dictator, they didn't use that word, but a tyrant or a monarchist or conspirator was floating around just like that. And the idea of democracy was being screamed out by a lot of people. But the funny thing is, what Aristophanes is pointing out is the humanities, it is not democratic at all. There is a conspirator, there is a monarchist, not in the conventional sense where there's a king, but there are few people who are actually controlling it. So what is so democratic about it? These people don't have their free choice or free vote. They are being manipulated by a couple of people, in this case, Cleo. So then moving on to the mock court, this is one of the most important parts of the play, where we have a court, like we get to see the Athenian court, but it's a mock court. So we have dogs and we have a clock. It's a made up court, and we have all these funny equipments coming in and a funny argument going on. It's about a piece of cheese, but all of these are allegorical. It's actually referring to something that was happening at that point in time. So in the mock court, if you look at it, you can see a few things that that are being laughed at. One is the two dogs, the dog, the first dog, and then the other one, Labes. So obviously the first dog is Cleon, Labes is Laches. This is a reference to the court case that's actually going to happen, or the one that Procleon missed rather. And there we see how the dog, the first dog, licks the jury and try to flatter Procleon and win him. Whereas Labes, he comes with puppies and his family and weeps. So trying to manipulate two different ways. One by bribery or direct contact with the jury. The other one by applying to their emotions. And both are being laughed at in the court. And the very idea, I'll come back to this under the political conversation. But the very idea of the court, the stealing, what is laughed at is not this. What is being judged is not stealing, but not sharing what was stolen. So I'll show you the quote and talk about it in a bit. So the very premise of the court case is made fun of, and the procedure is also made fun of. And yeah, I'll show you another example. So this is where Procleon talks about the quote-unquote perks of being a juror. Look at the bold sections. One of them slipped his delicate hand into mine, the very hand he has dipped so deeply into public funds. So this is what he's saying. So in the very initial part, Procleon says, I have a lot of power. As a juror, I have a lot of recognition. And one example he gives is this. People will slip that, this is bribery, right? And a hand that has been dipped deep into public funds. So these people steal from the public fund and bribe the jurors with that fund to give the sentence in their favor. So look at how twisted it is. This is the dark humor that I was talking about. There's nothing funny about it if you really look at it. But Aristophanes, he criticized this with this dark sense of humor. So that's one. And the next step, next layer of humor is Procleon is so proud of it. He's a juror. He's supposed to be vending out justice, but he's so proud to say, look, I get bribed by public funds. He just don't see the problem in it, which is also funny. I mean, not funny in a sense light-hearted humor, but it's just funny that he doesn't see the problem here at all. And then the next section here, I hope you can see my cursor. That's how they talk to me, people who've never known of my existence. So for Procleon, this kind of approach, this very humble approach to him is important, because otherwise his existence is not recognized. But as a juror, he has power. Why? Because he has a vote. And the funny thing, if you remember your lessons on court system, the justice system is, these jurors, they don't have the power to debate and argue. They just have to cast a vote. So all of this hassle, all this power is just casting a vote. It was important. The vote is important. I'm not trivializing the power of the vote, but it's not that they debated or argued or they controlled the masses. All of this bribing was to get the majority of the vote. So, yes, moving on. Then there is fun made at the jurors. So this is the part said by the leader referring to Procleon. So this part is where Aristophanes makes fun of the jurors themselves. And how he's basically asking, how can you trust these people to give a proper judgment? That's the idea. So if you look at the wasps or the jurors, they're really old people. In the beginning, we can see they can't even walk on their own. They need these boys helping them. And they are very poor and they come for the pay. Also, that pay is a major part of this service. And they're not exactly rational. They're not exactly logical. They come with very emotional sides. I mean, they come with they're already manipulated, some of them, and they come with a personal vendetta or a personal agenda. So this is this almighty jury of Athens. That's what Aristophanes is saying and laughing at. So, for example, imagine this. Imagine I was like a 5-year-old doing this lesson or doing this talk. You would find it extremely inappropriate, right? I mean, how can a 5-year-old do it? So you'd probably laugh at it. Similarly, what Aristophanes is asking is, how can these people who are really old, who can barely stand, how are they the force of justice in the state? It's not trivializing the old age. That's not the case. But he's looking or he's laughing at these people who are not thinking rationally or who are easily being manipulated, who are blind to the corruption and all the bad things, all the manipulation that's going on. How are they to deliver justice if they're blind to all of this? So he's laughing at the whole jury itself. And this selected section, he's talking here about, this is Procleon. He's the leader is saying, he is the sternest, sharpest stinger of all of us. So we get to see Procleon later. He's not the sharp. I mean, Anticleon is more sharper if you look at the two people. Anticleon looks like someone who can be in a jury. He sees both sides of the argument, and he's much younger. He's been up with the world. He's more open to new ideas. Whereas Procleon is clinging on to this image of Athens that was long ago. That was during the Persian Wars. So if he is the sternest and the sharpest, what about the rest? So there's a slight sense of humor here as well, thrown at the very jury itself. And I'm sorry, the formatting is a little off here. Democracy in court. So like I said, democratizing the judiciary system was one step towards full democracy in Athens. However, there were downsides to it. When you allow almost all people, or when you allow people, just random people, to be a part of a jury, we don't know whether they are educated enough in the laws. Can they make these decisions? So there were those questions with this idea of a public jury, a democracy. And the image I put here, this is too many cooks spoil the soup situation also is there, right? When there's a huge jury, there were like gigantic juries where you can't again debate and argue, you just cast a vote. So there are a lot of people with a lot of different backgrounds coming with a lot of different ideologies and trying to deliver justice. So they obviously see the same situation in different ways, right? So this is not directly questioned. Aristophanes don't drop this statement directly, but he questions the whole democratized court setting itself. The manipulation, the kind of jurors that are there, the kind of methods used to derive justice, all of that is there. So all in all, the idea itself is a little questionable. And again, you can't see justice here. Methods of delivering justice. I put this fellow, I hope you do. I'm pretty sure you've heard of Kakile Rajuru, right? Kakile Rajuruge Nadu Tindua is something extremely not unjust also. It's funny. I mean, we have so many stories about Kakile Rajuru and how he deliver justice. And that whole premise itself is funny, right? So we have something of a similar situation here with Aristophanes or the court, where the methods of delivering justice or methods of deciding who's right and wrong are hilarious. They are not at all rational or logical. So look at this one, for example. So this is Procleon telling how people come and try to win the jury over. Some of them bewail their poverty and pile on the agony. One will start quoting the legends, the other one come out with funny stories or start cracking jokes and put me in good humor. And if he can't win that way, he'll drag his children. So we see this whole thing playing out in the mock court with Lavis. But look at all this. These are not. So we are usually nowadays when you look at a law court, we have evidence and arguments, counter arguments, all of that. But here it's all emotional and it's about winning the people emotionally, or like previously shown, through bribery. And so justice itself is laughed at both in the law court and by Aristophanes. He's questioning what is justice. Again, this is not the humor that you just see and laugh. It's a dark sense of humor. He's laughing at the system itself. Okay. And so yeah, those are some instances through which there is this idea of judiciary system, not the idea, the judiciary system is laughed at, ideas through which it is laughed at. And remember, this was performed in a satirical, like a humorous, and we just read the play. So acting, technical wise also, it would have added to, especially the parts where I said the jurors are being laughed at. So that part would have been extremely funny when it's being acted out as well. We only get to see it. But yeah, we might be missing out on the technical aspects also. Moving on to the contemporary political situation. So he's again, like I said, very openly laughing at the contemporary political situation. To start with, we open the play itself with one of those, the dreams of Xanthias and Sosias. So they're talking about these two dreams that they've had while they're keeping guard of Procleon. So to first go with Xanthias' dream, he says, I dreamt an enormous eagle swooped down the market, snatching up a coppery sort of make and flying away. And Sosias is asking, okay, did it drop it? So this whole situation is a reference to this one person, Cleonymus, and there are two things. There's obviously very direct fun made out of this person. And the other one is we have an idea of what Athenians considered good or brave and what they considered cowardice. So here by the fact that they're laughing, Xanthias and Sosias is laughing at this shield dropping and running away, we can see for Athenians during this time, standing your ground, holding your line, that was the line to be living up to. And on the other hand, we have this very direct jab made at someone very popular. And then we also have this one. This is Sosias' dream. And this is actually the more important of the two in the discussion of justice and jurors. He says there was an assembly of sheep. They were holding an assembly at Nyx. They all had little cloaks on. So these sheep, therefore, are jurors and the staff. So cloaks and staffs. And they are being spoken to by a rapacious-looking creature with a figure like a whale and a voice like a soul. So this, you can, I'm sure you can guess at this point who this is in reference to, because already Procleon and the leader talked about this. They are the little sheep, and who was talking to them was Cleon, right? So this is that manipulation, that political manipulation that is being spoken of by Sosias through a dream. And remember, this is the opening scene of the play. So before we even go to the leader and Procleon and that whole discussion, we are already hinted as to what to expect. So someone Now, for us, this might be a little difficult. We might have to sit down and study this. But someone from the contemporary Athenian setting who knew the situation would have known exactly what this is about. This would have been a very quick and easily graspable allegory. And then look at the next part. So he's saying this horrible creature had a pair of scales and was weighing down bits of fat from carcass. So this is the political manipulation of the justice system. And this creature again is Cleon, right? So what we see later, Cleon's manipulation is hinted at here. And Cleon is a politician, right? He acts as a commander during this time. He's also a political figure. So how politics is used to manipulate, and again, there's a dark humor, how sadly funny this whole situation is. And the other thing about these two dreams, the important thing is, Sosias and Santias, they are slaves, right? So as slaves, usually when we look at slaves, if you look at slaves in other places, they have very trivial roles. They are supposed to be ignorant, they are not educated. They're supposed to be unaware of a lot of situations. They're supposed to be, in the lower most rungs of society. Even here, that's how they're treated by Anticleon. But so even these two slaves who are supposed to be in the lower rungs of the society, identifying the situation, they can see the manipulation, they're talking about it. That is important, right? They're supposed to be ignorant of this, but even they can see the problem. That is one thing that Aristophanes is saying. But the irony of the situation is Procleon, who's supposed to be this respected jury member and this really wise person or old and experienced person, he can't see the reality. Not only Procleon, he represents the whole jury here. So there's a sense of humor, or a ton of irony there also. If Santias and Sosias can see, why can't we others? Yeah, sorry. Okay, moving on. Then there is political humor through Anticleon and Procleon. The very names themselves, let's start with that. So they are very direct. Anticleon, someone against Cleon, and Procleon, who is for Cleon. So why Cleon? So Cleon during this time, like I said, a war was raging in the background, and Cleon was playing a dominant role. If you remember from yesterday, yeah, I mentioned the Battle of Spectria during the Peloponnesian War, where Cleon played a dominant role for the Athenians, and with that he got not popular. He rose to the top in Athenian politics. And he is also known to have been a very good speaker. And in a democratic setting, like I already said, your ability to speak was important because that was the way you could maneuver an audience or the crowd. So here Aristophanes is using this central character who uses his words and who has a reputation of not being the most straight or a little scrupulous, according to Aristophanes, that is. A kind of a manipulating personality. Remember, this is literature and this is one person's opinion. So we can't brand Cleon just like that based on wasps. But since we are talking about wasps, we have to go by Aristophanes' definition or his ideas. So anyway, we have Cleon at the center of this discourse throughout the play. And Anticleon is the new generation who's probably around the same age as Cleon, if you really think about it, but he sees things differently. He's the generation after the Persian War. So he doesn't, and especially in the later part of the second act, we see Procleon and Anticleon talking about the war. Procleon is saying, we fought in Marathon. We are the generation, we are those warriors. So they are stuck in that glory of Athens and that whole situation. Whereas Anticleon is from a generation after, he sees, he probably respects all of that, but he's also open to Spartans. He's also more kind of, let's say, in modern terms, an international person, what we'd call someone open to more ideas. But at the same time, he also sees through this problems in the political system. So he's used as a figure to critique Cleon. Whereas Procleon is also used to critique Cleon, all right, but his usage is to critique Cleon as a follower of Cleon. So anti-Cleon is an opposer who critique Cleon. Procleon is a follower of Cleon who is also used to critique Cleon. Procleon never critiques or criticizes Cleon, but Aristophanes uses Procleon's character to do that. So he used both characters to do that, basically. And through these characters, if you go through the book carefully, the dialogues, you will see that both of them laugh at the political situation. So we'll look at a couple of examples, but please read the book closely and you will notice more along the same lines. Okay. So this is one such situation. This is from the mock court. So Anti-Cleon is acting as the speaker in the court. He's saying, attention, please, for the indictment. The prosecution. The dog of Siddhartha against Labes of the Exon. The ground that said Labes did willfully and feloniously, it should be born and injure Sicilian cheese by eating it all himself. Penalty proposed a wood collar. So this is the situation I was referring to. It's not eating the cheese. It's not stealing, that's the issue. It's stealing all by himself. So this shows how twisted that situation is, right? I mean, ideally stealing should be the problem, but the dog standing for Cleon, his accusation is he stole, but he didn't give me a share. So I'm going to go to court for that. And the funny thing is, court is actually processing this. And like I said, this is allegorical. This is a reference to actually what happened. Obviously, they didn't say, okay, why didn't you share what you stole? They would have used other words, but the situation is the same. So this is the political corruption. People are fighting, like common soldiers are fighting, common people are fighting for the war, but these few, Labes, the dog, I mean, that is Laches and Cleon, and a certain group of people, they are profiting from it. So political manipulation, a very dark sense of humor again. And there's no room for two thieves in one kitchen. So look at how funny it is. The problem is not having thieves at all. The problem is the thieves trying to divide the territory up. So again, like I said, if you sit down and think, it's really dark, it's sad. But Aristophanes makes humor out of it. He's laughing at it, laughing at the crisis, the tragedy. Like I showed you previously, how we laughed at COVID, for example. And we do that. If we lose a match, we find a cricket match, that is, that being the more popular sport, we make fun of it. And if you're following FIFA these days, whenever someone big loses, Brazil, for example, recently, there were so many memes about it. I mean, it was really sad for a group of people, but there was humor created out of that sadness or that tragedy or that crisis. So this is exactly what Aristophanes was doing back in classical Athens also. None of these are funny in their own right, but he makes fun out of the situation. There's a dark sense of humor involved. So here again, the political manipulation of Athens, of the funds, of the whole military situation itself, that's the war, it's been made fun of by saying there's no room for two thieves in one kitchen. And yeah, finally, he's also laughing, there's this discussion of the Athenian Empire and the distribution of wealth. So like I said, a lot of people fought for Athens, starting from Persian Wars all the way through to Peloponnesian, and in the expansion of the empire. But if you remember, in certain situations, Anti-Cleon is asking, we get this much income. This is our Athenian, this is what Athenian treasury holds. So where is this money? You are just lining up for 3 obols, that's the pay of a juror. And where's the money? Where does the rest go? So it's obvious where the rest go. Look at this. You think you do. This is, you think you hold the power, but you don't. You're a lucky, yeah. They think that all the time. Oh yes, I know as an Athenian, you can squeeze the Greek world dry. This is a reference to the Athenian power at the time. But do you know what you are getting out of it? That is the question. Okay. And then this is another example. Just reckon up roughly on your fingers will do how much tribute we get altogether from the subject cities. So there's a lot of subjects. This is an empire. And add to that revenue, the taxes, the deposits, the mines. Add this up and we have a total of nearly 12 million drachmas a year. Now, how much of it do you get? So again, this is economic fraud as well, but it's being handled by politicians. So political corruption, manipulation, and again, so Aristophanes is using Anticleon to critique this, and he's using Procleon as the subject of this other side of it. So imagine it was two people who were against Cleon, two anti-Cleons. This conversation can't happen, right? Because both of them will get together and blame Cleon. If there are two people partial to Cleon, that is two pro-Cleons, again, this conversation will not happen because they will be blind to this manipulation. So by taking one anti-Cleon and one pro-Cleon, Aristophanes has managed to have this discussion, and it's presented in a funny way, but like I said, he's laughing at the whole situation. So that brings us to the end of this discussion. I only touched on a few selected examples. There's a whole lot of it in the book, which you can't quote all of it. So read the book. I recommend that you read it again along these lines, and you might see there are other instances that can add to this list. And yeah, if you have any questions about any of it, we can talk about them at the end in the question and answer session. So just to sum it up, Aristophanes used this play during a time of crisis to critique several things. Judiciary and politics are two examples. There are the social criticisms as well. And he uses humor. There's slapstick humor, light-hearted humor, where there's a lot of running around, there's a lot of beating up. But underneath that, there is a dark sense of humor where he laughs at the system itself. So he laughs at the court system, the very idea of this court, the degenerated Athenian court system, the jurors who are blind to everything that's happening, the manipulation itself is being laughed at, methods of delivering justice is laughed at, and finally the democratic court system, which was initially a very good idea and a very important step towards Athenian democracy, but at this point it's questionable. And in the political side, he talks about the political manipulation, the economic, the frauds that are behind it, and he uses characters like Anticleon, Procleon, and Xanthias and Sosias to give up different arguments about this whole situation. And also finally about Athenian supremacy and what that means to Athenians. So we usually talk about what Athenian supremacy means to other states when we talk about history. But here we look at it from the inside. What does the supremacy mean for Athenians? And according to Anticleon, not much, because they are not profiting from it. Only a few are profiting from the empire. The rest are as poor as they were once. So there's a lot of layers to this discussion, and if you have questions, we'll talk about it at the end. So with that, I'll bring my session to an end, and we'll move on to the next one, which is about two Caesars, which will be by Miss Supunekanak. Ma'am, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Amanti. I hope all of you can hear me clearly. So as you probably heard, I'm going to talk about the two Caesars. So let me first start by sharing my slides. Okay. I hope you can clearly see the slides on my screen.
They're visible, ma'am.
Okay, right. Thank you. So we're actually going to talk about a very interesting time in Roman history, the late Republic. So as you know, Rome started off with a monarchical constitution, but of course, due to a number of issues which rose with the monarchical system, it soon gave way to the Republican constitution, which they founded based upon the premise of the division of power and checks and balances. So at the beginning, we see everything functioning quite smoothly because the Roman Republic actually had a very solid basis on the traditional Roman virtues that they were so proud of and that which they thought of as a legacy of their ancestors. So because of that very strong moral basis, the Roman Republic endured for a very long time. However, the turning point comes with the Punic Wars. I think I can talk to you freely about this because you have obviously studied this section in your Roman history. So I'm sure that all of you are aware how the Punic Wars, the series of conflicts between Rome and Carthage, resulted in a paradigm shift, which changed the entire social, political, economic, and cultural landscape of Rome. So with that, we can see the Republican basis being challenged, changing its core values. And this is the context which gave rise to these two individuals that we are going to talk about. So we are going to look into the two Caesars, Julius Caesar, and of course, Caesar Augustus. Now, I think before moving on to the two individuals, let's talk about the social, political, and economic landscape of Rome during the late Republic. I think understanding this political, social landscape of the time is definitely necessary for us to appreciate the different layers to the careers of the two protagonists that we are talking about. So starting with the economic evils, we see that the first thing you notice is the decay of the yeoman farmer class. So the small-scale farmers who were supposed to be the backbone of the Roman economy, they suffered quite immensely with the competition that came from large-scale farming and so many other complications. And the yeoman farmer class during this time was slowly but surely decaying. And then we can't, of course, forget about the political issues that are apparent during the time. So as I have mentioned, the first one being the apparent party conflicts between the optimates and the populares on the one hand, and on the other hand, between the equites and the Senate. So as you would know, this is definitely one of the most turbulent times in Roman politics, which definitely adds to the evils of the time. And then violence by this time has become a prominent part of Roman politics. It all started with the assassination of the Gracchi, but by now it has certainly become a part and parcel of Roman politics, so much so that you either become a victim of violence, you exercise violence to meet your political ends. Whatever it is, violence becomes a very, should I say, a necessary part of Roman politics. Next, we see the social condition of Rome during this time, and two evils are quite prominent. On the one hand, we see the depopulation of Italy, where people actually migrate, the country population migrate to cities, and cities were basically overpopulated. And it's also worthwhile to think, what kind of a population do we actually see in the cities? So these are people who are extremely poor, desperate, who are looking for some way to be, sustained in the city. So this actually makes this the perfect breeding ground for moral corruption. And that's the last point that I have mentioned in the slides, if you can see. So the moral decadence of the people is quite evident. And the traditional Roman virtues that I talked about at the very beginning, which was fundamentally the foundation of the Republic, slowly gave way to their attending vices. So this is the kind of turbulent, corrupted backdrop that you see in Rome during this time. So I'm sure that you have read these series of issues over and over again, right? Before the Civil War, before the Gracchi. And the very fact that these evils are repeated shows that the Romans, people who came to power, were actually unable to redress these issues. So I think understanding that is extremely important when it comes to appreciating what we are going to discuss next. So moving on to the next part of our discussion. So these evils, if you will, that we were talking about culminated in the conspiracy of Catiline in 63 BC. And this was clearly a very critical point for Rome, as Cicero mentions in his famous orations against Catiline, which you actually see in this picture. Cicero is delivering his speeches against Catiline in the Senate. Cicero clearly makes it evident that it is a critical time for Rome, as in it was a danger, unprecedented danger that Rome faced. But thanks to Cicero, you can see that this apparent danger was averted, and this is the backdrop in which Julius Caesar comes to power. So let's focus on the first Caesar that we are supposed to discuss, Julius Caesar. So as you know, he's one of the most iconic personalities that lived during the late Republican time, one of the main personalities that actually shaped the political landscape of the time. So he was born in 100 BC. It goes without saying that he was an extremely able soldier, as proven by his campaigns in Gaul, Spain, and not to forget Asia. And he's also a man of literature. He was a scholar. He was a very skilled orator. He was an author. He had written 2 monumental works on his Gallic campaigns and this civil war that he engaged with his political rival. So he is very much a cultured man. And the main thing about Caesar is that he was extremely popular. He knew how to sway the people, and people absolutely loved him, and especially his veterans. He had an extremely charismatic personality. But let's not forget that just as he made a lot of friends, he also made a number of enemies, right? Okay, moving on. Let's talk a little bit about his political orientation. Now, why is this important? It's important because this is how he shaped his political career. Now, interestingly, he was born into a patrician family. In fact, he was born into one of the most illustrious of patrician families, gens Julia, which actually claims lineage from Aeneas himself, one of the legendary founders of Rome. So obviously, he had a very strong patrician background when you regard his upbringing, but he was also very strongly connected with the popular party, the populares. So as you again probably know, the marriage of his aunt with Marius, and then his own marriage with Cinna's daughter kind of cemented that aspect of his political orientation. So remember that he was a born patrician, but with a very strong connection with the popular party. However, when creating his political identity, the kind of identity that he wanted to convey across, he clearly identified himself with the popular party as a popular leader. So he, in some of the crucial instances for the popular cause, and there are two things that are often mentioned in connection to his support of the popular party. One is how he supported the Lex Gabinia and Lex Manilia. Both are supposed to be very popular law legislations. Then he had this habit of exalting the memory of Marius in his speeches. Whenever he made a public speech, he made sure that he mentioned Marius and exalted his memory. And at a certain point, he goes on to restoring the statues of Marius as well. But yes, by doing so, he further illustrated his identity. Marius is regarded as the quintessential popular, leader. So by connecting himself with Marius, he tried to rub that a little bit on himself as well. And all in all, he turned out to become an enemy of the Senate. But notice I have mentioned the qualifier vocal enemy, because one thing that strikes out about Julius Caesar is that he did not hide the fact that he hated the Senate. He was extremely vocal when it comes to expressing how much he hates the Senate and what the Senate stood for. And he, of course, had good reasons for that, as we would discuss later. Now, moving on, the basis for Caesar's accession to power was formed through the first triumvirate. He, of course, showed every mark of a promising leader from what we have discussed before, but still, his accession to power was further augmented by the creation of this first triumvirate. So what is the first triumvirate? The Latin version of this term simply means three men, right? An alliance of three men. And that's exactly what it was. So it was formed by Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar together. And these were three of the most powerful individuals in Rome of the time. Now, another thing that you have to remember this is that this first triumvirate is a secret alliance. And this is something that you have to remember in contrast to the second triumvirate, which is certainly not secretive. It was made known to the people, but the first triumvirate, keep in mind, was a secret alliance. And it was formed against the Senate. That was very, very evident from the very beginning, that it was an alliance that was formed particularly, specifically against the Senate or the senatorial authority. And why? Why did these three individuals got together against the Senate, supposed to be the most powerful part of the Roman constitution? Of course, both Caesar and Pompey had good reasons to dislike the Senate. The Senate, of course, viewed Caesar as a threat. That goes without saying, not just because of his charismatic nature, not just because they were jealous of how much people loved him and how influential he is, but also because of his vocal dislike of the Senate, as I have mentioned before. So one of the things that they did was to refuse Caesar his triumph. And this was kind of the turning point, which really, pitted Caesar against the Senate. And of course, something quite similar happened to Pompey, where the Senate actually refused to endorse his acts in Asia. So together with Crassus, Pompey and Caesar formed this very diabolical alliance, which ended up being the first triumvirate. So let me reiterate that it was extremely powerful and influential, mainly because of what the triumvirate or the triumvirs, the three men, brought into the table. So Julius Caesar, what did he bring? Popularity. He was extremely popular. So Caesar's popularity crosses his immense wealth. He was known to be the richest man of the time. And then, of course, Pompey's military prowess. He was reputed to be the greatest military man of the time. So together, as I have mentioned here, Caesar's popularity, Crassus's wealth, and Pompey's military prowess made the triumvirate extremely powerful and influential. So with the help of the triumvirate, Caesar was elected consul in 60 BC, and you can clearly see the popular leader in him being reflected through the reforms and certain measures that he took. This would probably remind you of Tiberius and Gaius, at least a version of them. So he certainly passed agrarian laws and gave land to Pompey's soldiers. He founded settlements in Campania for the pauper population in Rome. But then he was also quite pragmatic in the sense that he wanted to satisfy his fellow partners in the triumvirate. So he obtained ratification of Pompey's acts, which the Senate had refused earlier, and then also consolidated the tax farmers who came from the equites class. So clearly, Caesar tried to balance giving the people some kind of a relief, and also balance the ambitions of the triumvirate with that. But then he also didn't forget to think about himself. So he granted himself the ownership of Gaul and Illyria, and just to be safe, he got his supporters appointed to the chief officers of the state. So this is what he did during his consulship. So here you would see the three triumvirs, Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar. Now, the next stage comes when the inevitable happens. So what do I mean by the inevitable? The breakup of the triumvirate. So when it comes to the breakup of the triumvirate, let me say that on the one hand, it was natural. It was clearly a natural thing. And why? Why would I say that it's natural? Because the individual ambition clearly came into conflict with the ambitions of the triumvirate. And this was clearly foreshadowed with Julius Caesar's departure to Gaul, where there were problems within the triumvirate, and they had to have this conference at Lucca in 56 BC, where Caesar actually had to reconciliate Pompey and Crassus. So it is natural, it is foreshadowed, and it happened. And there were certain catalysts that were responsible. The death of Crassus during an invasion of Parthia, the death of Julia, Julia's sister's daughter and Pompey's wife. This further kind of weakened the bond between the triumvirs. Then to add to this, the jealousy of Pompey. And this was clearly excited after Caesar's very successful Gallic campaigns, because before this, it was Pompey who was actually known as the military man or the military genius of Rome. And everyone was talking about Pompey's military adventures and achievements. But all of a sudden, with the Gallic campaigns, everyone was talking about Caesar and Caesar's achievements. So that kind of became the tipping point with Pompey. So Pompey ended up marrying Cornelia, who was the daughter of Scipio, who was Caesar's enemy, or one of Caesar's arch enemies. So clearly now Pompey made his choice. He was very, very jealous of the growing renown of Caesar, and he goes on to join the senatorial party, and with that the triumvirate collapses, it dissolves. So Pompey, as I mentioned in the earlier slide, joins with the Senate, and what happens is that he passes a number of laws, particularly targeting Caesar, and this culminated in the motion of the Senate demanding Caesar's resignation from his command and Caesar's refusal. So with Caesar refusing, the Senate declared him a public enemy. And to further add to this, you have the two tribunes who supported Caesar complaining to him that they were harassed by the Senate. So this, of course, led to one of the most iconic civil wars in Roman history between Pompey and Caesar. So it all started with Caesar crossing the Rubicon in 49, as Suetonius says in his 12 Caesars. He says the die has been cast. These were the iconic words of Caesar as he crosses the Rubicon in 49 BC. So he marched with his army. He marches against Rome, and this marks the beginning of the Civil War. So completely unprepared, the Senate and Pompey fled the city, and Caesar enters Rome as the undisputed master of Rome. So the war kept on progressing at different places, and as you see, I have highlighted some of the important instances, and it's, I think, very important to keep these instances in mind, just as some of the highlights of the conflict between Caesar and Pompey. So in Spain, Caesar defeated the lieutenants of Pompey at Herda, and he ended up subduing Spain. Then passing on to Greece, the iconic victory at Pharsalia in 48 BC, which led Pompey to flee to Egypt, and this is where he was subsequently killed. So again, moving on to Egypt, he of course found Pompey killed, and however, Caesar got himself involved in the famous Alexandrine War, which was between Cleopatra and her brother. He ends up getting involved with Cleopatra, and if I'm not mistaken, he even had a son by Cleopatra. So then in Africa, with the death of Pompey, now we have the partisans of Pompey. So he defeated partisans of Pompey, Cato and Scipio at the Battle of Traxus in 46 BC, and in Spain, the final victory at the Battle of Munda. So with that, the civil war between Caesar and Pompey comes to an end, thus making Julius Caesar the most powerful individual in Rome. So basically, Julius Caesar ruled in the capacity of an absolute ruler. So in 49 BC, he was appointed dictator for the very first time, but and he actually abdicated his post very quickly. But then again in 48 BC, he was appointed dictator, but this time it was for an indefinite time period. And in 46 BC, he was appointed dictator for 10 years. And at the same time, he was given permanent tribution power, that is the power of a tribute. So this means that his self was declared sacred, and he certainly has the power to veto the Senate. And at this point, the Senate was extremely, afraid of Caesar, and to pacify him, the Senate kept on, giving him all kinds of honors, like They declared him pater patriae and imperator for life, so and so on. But in spite of all the efforts of the Senate to pacify Caesar, Caesar's anger or his enmity with the Senate continued. So the next thing we need to talk about would be the reforms of Caesar. So he brought out some social reforms, as you would see here, establishing colonies in Carthage and Corinth, restoring agriculture, lowering the interest rates of debt. He also constructed public buildings, which were meant to provide employment to the poor. And he also extended Roman citizenship to the provinces. This is one of the most significant contributions that he made. And of course, the most interesting would be his constitutional reforms and how it reflected his attitude towards the Senate. Of course, he increased the number of the senators to 900. This might actually appear as something positive, but in reality, you have to see whether it really is a positive thing for the Senate, which it was not, because you need to see how he increased the numbers of the Senate to 900. And this was clearly true, allowing all these quote and unquote undesirable members, foreigners, poor people, all these undesirables to become part of the Senate. So he clearly tried to break the exclusiveness of the Senate, its prestige. He also tried to break the prestige and the exclusiveness of the patrician families by creating new patrician families. And certainly, last but not certainly the least, introduced uniform municipal government through Lex Julia Municipialis. So this kind of like symbol, it tells us of how he attempted to introduce some kind of a uniformity to municipal government, which was one of the main issues that Rome was facing. So he actually tried to rectify that. So from that, let's move on to Caesar's assassination, because we see Caesar's power appearing to be unprecedented, or at least that's how the others saw it. And this resulted in a conspiracy headed by the Senate against Caesar, by a group of senators headed by Brutus and Cassius. And this is what led to his assassination in the Ides of March in 44 BC. Now, it's very interesting to see how these two individuals, Brutus and Cassius, symbolically projects the kind of attitude people had towards Caesar. Now, the latter that is mentioned here, Cassius, had a private grudge against Caesar. It was simple as that. he was jealous, and it was extremely personal for Cassius. However, the more interesting thing is reflected through Brutus. Now, as again you probably know, Brutus is one of Caesar's closest friends. However, Brutus and many other sincere republicans, by sincere republicans, I mean people who felt that the republican form of government was the best possible form of government. Such as sincere republicans felt that Caesar is becoming a threat to the well-being or the existence of the republic. In other words, they felt that in order for the republic to survive, they need to get rid of Caesar. And it was, as many critics point out, one of the blunders, one of the tragic blunders of history, because history shows us that that wasn't the case, because Caesar was gotten rid of, right? He was killed, he was assassinated, but that did not help to keep the republic alive. The republic collapsed in spite of Caesar's assassination. So that tells us that we need to look for something else. We need to dig deeper into this issue of why the republic fell. And that we will do in a few minutes. Okay, so we end this part of our discussion with the assassination of Caesar in 44 BC. So we have this very, again, very chaotic period from Julius Caesar's death, assassination, to the rise of Augustus. So we will look at this under a few separate headings, like the formation of the second triumvirate between Lepidus, Octavius, and Antony. Then, of course, the civil war between Octavius and Antony, which ended with the Battle of Actium and Antony's death. And that paves way to the rise of Augustus Caesar and the rise of imperial Rome. So let's move on to that part of our discussion. So with Julius Caesar's assassination, Rome was broken into two hostile fractions. So you have the Republicans headed by Brutus, and the partisans of Caesar headed by Mark Antony. Now, in order to avoid a potential civil strife, the Senate came to a compromise with Caesar's supporters. So the compromise was that Caesar's murderers are to be pardoned. However, Caesar's measures should remain in force, and Caesar's last will needs to be honored. So that was the compromise, which actually helped to maintain at least a degree of stability in Rome. However, this stability is very short-lived because Anthony himself actually had his own ambitions. So Anthony is the principal supporter of Caesar, and he clearly aspired to succeed to Caesar's power after Caesar's assassination. And this is why he actually roused popular opinion against Caesar's assassins. And here you need to remember he used Caesar's funeral oration, the oration that he made in honor of Caesar's dead body, as a way of arousing anger, popular indignation against the murderers of Caesar. So he certainly did have his personal ambitions. So this is where Octavius comes to the picture. So Octavius is the great nephew of Caesar, his adopted heir. So he comes to Rome after Caesar's death, claiming Caesar's inheritance. But that is the first instance where he actually clashed with Anthony because Anthony refused, right? So he actually turned this instance into something positive for himself, an opportunity to win the hearts of the people with his generosity. So when Anthony refused to, give him Caesar's legacies, to pay the people the money that Caesar had promised them, he actually, that is Octavius, paid these people through his own money. So that actually won him the hearts of the people. At this point, very carefully thinking, he joined the Senate to first the formation of the second triumvirate takes place, this time between Octavius, Anthony, and Lepidus. So this was clearly an attempt to divide the power of Rome among themselves. But just like the first triumvirate and the instances that led to the fall of the first triumvirate, history repeats itself. History repeated itself. And the same happened to the second triumvirate. So here, Anthony, who was engaged with Cleopatra, was extremely jealous of his rising power and popularity, because just as Anthony was kind of detaching himself from popular opinion, Octavius was becoming increasingly popular among the people. So this jealousy ultimately results in another civil war between, this time between Octavian and Anthony. So this ends with the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, with the death of Antony and Cleopatra. And this actually becomes the sole, leads to Octavian becoming the sole ruler of the Roman world, the most powerful individual in the Roman world. However, I need to mention one thing at this point. Octavian actually learned a very valuable lesson from the mistake that was committed by Julius Caesar. And that is not to show the fact that he's powerful. So in order to do that, in 27 BC, Octavian publicly resigned from all the powers and privileges that were granted to him, and he simply undertook the government of Liberia, Gaul, and Syria. That's all, right? So the rest was handled by the Senate, and the Senate continued to nominate Octavian as consul. And at a certain point, they voted that he should be given a new name. So that's how Octavian became Augustus Caesar. So finally, let's look at the rule of Augustus Caesar. So this is certainly known as the Golden Age of Rome. And one thing that you need to remember about Augustus is that he was very conservative. He wanted to reintroduce the old Roman virtues back to the society and establish order and stability in Rome that Rome seriously lacked. So this is clearly the greatest contribution of Augustus Caesar, because before Augustus, there had been an uninterrupted chain of wars and public disturbances, public unrest affecting Rome. But now, for the first time, we see Rome experiencing some degree of order and stability in place of that chaos that had been ever present in Rome for decades and decades. So he certainly introduced a new basis for Roman government, which again we will discuss in a minute, and we call this the Principate. So let's take a look at the Golden Age of Rome a little closer. Now, when it comes to the political condition, as I said, there was a lot of stability in Rome. And the first thing that that Augustus did was to reorganize the Senate. He purged the Senate of all the the undesirables that Julius Caesar introduced, and brought the number back to 600. And by doing so, he actually restored the Senate's former prestige. And he clearly maintained a very cordial, friendly relationship with the Senate. He showed due respect to the Senate, unlike Julius Caesar, who at a certain point even didn't bother to stand up when a group of senators came to meet him, right? That was how vocal he was in his dislike to the Senate. But unlike Julius Caesar, Augustus had a very cordial relationship with the Senate, and a big part of it is that treating them with respect, and more importantly, making them feel that they are powerful. So that is very important, his relationship with the Senate. He also augmented a number of social reforms. He passed laws to discourage extravagance and licentiousness, which has become a huge problem in Rome. He tried to strengthen marriage and family life by introducing laws against adultery and divorce. He actually made adultery punishable by death or exile. And he also imposed taxes on unmarried men. So, you can see that traditionalist in him coming through the social reforms that he introduced, because he really did want to reintroduce those old, Republican values back to society. Okay. And then he, of course, implemented a number of public projects. He beautified the city by building new public buildings, repairing old temples that had fallen into decay. He also secured a regular water supply to the city, which has become part of Rome's heritage and pride, because Rome was known as a city that always had fresh water for everyone. So he also revived a number of ancient religious ceremonies, reintroducing the old gods of the city. And he also said to have established a permanent navy, which undertook to subdue pirates and thereby promote security in the waters of Rome, and also to ensure a free supply of grain coming to Rome. So these are some of the public works that he undertook. And he had famously boasted that he had left Rome a city of marbles, a city that he had found of bricks. Now he had transformed into a city of marble. So he really did turn Rome into this thriving metropolis. Also, it's noteworthy to look at the financial regulations that he introduced. So he regulated the finances of the empire. He started off by conducting a survey of the revenue. And based on that survey, he imposed two taxes, the land tax and tax on personal property. So this is also a very positive trait that we see. And this is clearly connected with provincial administration as well, because the provincials were subjected to a number of miscellaneous taxes, which became a huge problem, and it was never regular, right? So he regulated the whole setup. He reorganized the provinces as imperial and senatorial provinces, introduced a very uniform taxation for them so that they cannot be extorted. And also, he introduced a fixed salary for provincial administrators, thus discouraging them from, exploiting the provinces. So these are clearly very important changes that he introduced. And then let me end my discussion by looking at two other important things that should be attributed to Augustus, the literary activities that happened during this time. So this was truly the golden age of Latin literature. So some of the best Latin writers like Ovid, Virgil, Horace, they worked during this time, and it's important to see that they worked under the patronage that was given by Augustus. So he was one of the greatest patrons of art and literature of his time. And the interesting thing is that his close associates, other nobles like him, they actually followed Augustus's example, and they also provided patronage for these young artists. So it's no wonder that art, literature, and literary works thrived during this time. And last, but certainly not the least, the Pax Romana that he introduced was certainly what made everything else possible. Because throughout the empire, there was peace and stability. And without such peace and stability, none of the things that we talked about pertaining to the golden age, whether it's literary pursuit or beautification of the city, would have been possible. Because all this time, Rome had so many civil disturbances, as I said earlier. It was, one war after another. And in a way, this is one reason why Rome succumbed to the rise of one-man power. But now, thanks to Augustus, there's peace and stability in each nook and corner of the Roman Empire for the very first time. And that, I think, was the foundation upon which the Golden Age was established by Augustus. So that actually brings us to the end of our discussion of the two Caesars. You can see that in conclusion that the two Caesars are extremely different, and their approaches, their individual approaches are extremely different. But all in all, both of them in their own way left a lasting legacy in the annals of Roman history. And that needs to be appreciated. So I hope everything was clear. And if you have any questions, let's of course discuss them during our panel discussion later on. Thank you very much. And Amanti, over to you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Yeah, like Ms. Supun mentioned, if you have any questions or anything to clarify, we'll talk about it at the end in the question and answer session. So now let's go to a small break, a 10-minute break. But before we go to the break, I'll play a small video as mentioned in the handout. about what kind of a student life there is within the classic students at the department and at the faculty, and very, very briefly about what kind of fields you can go to if you choose to follow a degree in classical languages. Because I'm sure a lot of people are being faced with why classics questions. So this is a very brief introduction to it.
We gonna rise till we fall. They say we got no future at all. They wanna keep us out, can't hold us down anymore. We gonna rise till we fall. When we hit the bottom, nothing gon' stop us. Climb to the top with you. We could be the greatest ones who never made it. Yeah, I could be talking to you. They tryna hate, but we won't change anything at all. Oh, we gonna rise till we fall. They think we just dropped out, living at our mom's house. Parents must be so proud, they know it all. No, they don't speak our language. They say we're too savage. Yeah, no, we don't give up anymore. We're gonna rise till we fall. We're gonna rise till we fall. They don't speak our language. They say we're too savage. Yeah, no, we don't give up anymore.
So that was a very, very brief video into some of the activities we have done up to this point and some of the fields you can consider. All right, so we'll move on to a 10-minute break, and now it's 10:15, so we'll reconvene at 10:25 sharp, and we'll move on to the next session. Thank you. All right, welcome back to the second half of today's session. So we'll start off then with the next topic, which is Terence, identity and recognition in Terence's Mother-in-law. So let me share screen. Okay, I hope you can see the screen. So again, like Wasps, Terence's Mother-in-law is another comedy, but this time it falls under new comedy. So again, this is a complex play. It has many layers, but we'll only be looking at a couple of them. The idea of identity and recognition. Sometimes they work together. Sometimes we can look at them separately as well. So before going into the play itself or the theme itself, I'll just quickly take a look at new comedy. So I previously mentioned when I was talking about Wasps that that's the content of new comedy and old comedy. It was different, and with the change to imperial Rome and a single ruler coming in. Actually, it happens from all the way from Macedonian Empire and then in Rome when it comes to imperial Rome. When single rulers came into power, the kind of attack that Aristophanes unleashed on the government was no longer possible, because this time if you attack a government, that meant you are attacking a single person, and that was dangerous to the writer. So new comedy, for this and few other reasons, they changed the approach to more domestic topics. So attacks on people like Cleon, for example, on military leaders and political leaders or even religious personnel was not too common in new comedy. Instead, like I said, more domestic affairs were discussed. Gods were made sometimes. There are instances where they are made fun of, or they are used in the discussion, but never political leaders, or almost never political leaders. So to give you a modern example of what new comedy might have looked like back in the day, I showed you a couple of political satires in the old comedy section. So TV shows like Friends or Big Bang Theory, 21 and over. There's a whole lot, and this goes on. These are some things like that, right? Very domestic affairs, very personal issues that are made humor out of. They're not made fun of, it's not the case, but these affairs are used as the base of humor. So new comedy, the most closest we can get to this idea as to from the 21st or 20th to 21st centuries is these sitcoms like this. Anyway, so moving on to the idea of recognition and identity. One thing that we can see in Terence is this journey from not only in Terence, in some of a number of comic writers, is this journey from ignorance or misconception or deception to recognition. So the plot is a path or a journey of certain characters, sometimes the entire cast list, or sometimes some of the characters, their journey from ignorance or sometimes misconception or both, or sometimes deliberate deception to recognition. So the plot revolves around this path, and in Terence also, this is the situation is similar. We actually go from ignorance to recognition and misconception to recognition both. Some characters, for them, the journey is from ignorance to recognition. For another group, it's from misconception to recognition. And there is one situation where there's deliberate deception as well. So we'll talk about it. And when it comes to the idea of recognition, which I'll talk mostly in the second part of the discussion, it happened in two ways. One is the recognition by characters. So this is happening within the plot of the play, where some characters recognize certain things that lead to the resolution of the plot. Then there is the recognition by the audience, as you as a reader in this case, because you're using the script, or if you were in the audience back then, how is your journey of recognition unraveling during the course of the play? And let's go to the main thing first. So identity and recognition working together as a means to resolution of the play. So that's also the topic of the discussion, identity and recognition. So how is the recognition of an identity lead to the resolution of this play, Terence's Mother-in-law? So I'm not going to go into the plot. I'm assuming that you're already thorough with the plot of the play. Hopefully you've studied it also, studied it well, that is. So I'm not going into the plot. I'll be just referring to it here and there. So we know that the identity of, let's actually move on to this. The identity of the rapist of Philomena is unknown at the beginning of the play. So is the identity of the father. So they're related, right? So if you look at the plot of the play, what basically happens is each character's journey, or some of the characters' journey, to the identification of this particular individual that eventually leads to the resolution of the play. So identity and recognition of this particular individual, who later turns out to be Pamphilus, resolves the play. So if you look at this journey, couple of things help it. One is this trinket. So the use of trinket was a common thing in most of Roman comedy or ancient comedy. A trinket was an object that was used to usually for the sole purpose of recognition. If you all are doing English literature and if you all are doing Othello, the handkerchief acts as a trinket. In that case, it's not exactly of recognition. It further complicates the plot actually. In Terence's case, this goes for this is used for resolution. So Bacchus's ring, which leads to the resolution or the identification of the assaulter and the resolution. And then there is also partial revelation. I'll talk about this at the very end again as well. So in the beginning of the play, a lot of people are confused as to why Pamphilus refuses to accept Philomena as a so in the beginning, nobody knows why Philomena moves out of the house. That's this big mystery. And then when Pamphilus returns, then there's a lot of people, for example, Laches, very confused as to why Pamphilus can't accept Philomena back in the house. So only Pamphilus, Myrina, and Philomena, they are the ones who know the truth, the actual situation. And it is for them that the revelation is happening. So it's that's why I said it's a partial revelation. Also Bacchus. So other than these four characters who know the full story and the audience, the rest of the characters know only parts of it. Parmino knows part of it. Laches and Oedipus are completely in the dark. Sostrata is also in the dark. So there's a revelation, or the unraveling of the truth only happens to a certain group in the play. So identity and recognition therefore work as a duo or a couple or a pairing in the resolution of the plot, where the identity, like I said, of the assaulter and the identity of the father of the child is revealed. That leads to the resolution. And then there's also the identity of the individual characters. So this is where I take identity as a different entity and then later recognition as a different entity in the discussion. So identity of individual characters, how are they? It works two ways. What is the real identity and what is the identity that is kind of thrust on them by the other characters of the play. So let's start with the identity of Sostrata. Before Sostrata's character is fully unraveled, I mean, the very title of the play is Mother-in-law. Sostrata is a mother-in-law in the play, and her character is molded by two things, and it's done by Laches actually. So he says, now he very strongly believes that the reason why Philomena moved out of the house is a problem with Sostrata. Sostrata would have triggered this movement, or Sostrata is behind this movement. And therefore her role as a mother-in-law, just the fact that she happens to be mother of Pamphilus, her situation as a mother-in-law is pushed on her character. So it's like all mother-in-laws are like this. You're a mother-in-law, therefore you must be like this. That is the logic through which Laches looks at this whole situation, and he kind of stamps that on Sostrata without even giving her a chance to explain. So her identity molded by her situation in life as a mother-in-law. So this quote over here is one example for that. He says, what a tribe they are. So he puts all mother-in-laws into this one basket, in league, the whole lot of them, every blessed woman with the same likes and dislikes as all others. And there's no exception, that's what he's saying. And this whole battle, the legendary battle between mother-in-laws and daughter-in-laws. So they are in one mind to hate each other. So you can see there's a huge stereotyping here, and that is stamped on Sostrata's character. So that's one. And then her situation as a woman, her whole identity as a woman. Again, there's a stereotype. This is by Sostrata herself. She says, please let me be exempt from the universal slander of my sex. So this idea of females being, Laches has this idea, Laches, and at the end even Philippus walks a little close to this, as jealous or as vindictive in this case, evil even. All of that is stamped on this bunch of women, like the idea of women, and that stereotype in turn is stamped on Sostrata. So later we realize, like we as the audience in Sostrata's monologues and soliloquies, we see that she is actually someone who is really willing to go all the way to make this marriage a success for Pamphilus and Philomena. She's even willing to go to the countryside and lead a less luxurious life, if that is what it takes for Philomena and Pamphilus to have a good marriage. So she's willing to do anything. She's not jealous, or she's nothing that Laches suspect her to be. But the very fact that she happened to be a woman and she happened to be a mother-in-law kind of molds her identity. And later, as the audience, we realize that that is not her real identity. So there's a revelation of identity of Sostrata by the audience, which unfortunately Laches does not realize, but Pamphilus does. So some redemption, or certain redemption. So anyway, that is one idea of identity that we see. And then another interesting character is that of Bacchis. So Bacchis is a courtesan. The very identity of a courtesan had a lot of stigma. She has clients. Pamphilus is one of them. And it is told, this is again, we hear about Bacchis initially. If you remember the opening scene itself between Parmeno and the other prostitutes, we hear about Bacchis. So we have some idea of Bacchis. And then we hear about her from Laches and Philippus. And finally, we encounter Bacchis. So again, we have Bacchis as a courtesan, and that stigma and that stamp on her. And then what Parmeno and the prostitutes that he meet, what they stamp on her, what Laches and Philippus. So she has few layers already built, and then she comes on stage, and we as the audience interact with her, we see her, and then we have the revelation of her actual identity. So if you look at a couple of examples, this is the opening, like the first part of the play. What about Bacchis? So Parmeno is, gossiping with Philotis and Syra about the marriage of Pamphilus, how he's having a hard time reconciling to the very idea of marriage. And when Philotis asks, so what about Bacchis? How is she reacting to the marriage? Because she used to be Pamphilus's mistress, but now there's a legal wife involved. So what is her reaction to it? Look at what Parmeno says. But naturally, when she saw that he was no longer all her own, she became more demanding. So this is the first image we get of Bacchis, someone who is starting to feel jealous, kind of a negative image. We'll see at the end whether that's true. And then at the very end, Bacchis says, when Laches and Philippus wants her to go and talk to Philomena and Myrene, she says, this is not something another woman of my profession would do. We would never go and talk to the actual married woman of the man that she's a mistress of. This is something we never do, but I'm doing it because I want this. I don't want to be a part of why this marriage fails. I want to help Pamphilus in any way I can. So she doesn't want to be accused of being the reason for the failure of the marriage. And later in the next, after the realization of and the recognition of the trinket or the ring, she says, I'm going to help him make this marriage a success. So this is where we see how she reacts to the marriage. So initially what we saw here is what Parmeno and later Laches and Philippus, what they stamp on her identity, and this is revealed as her identity to us directly by the playwright. And then when it comes to Philomena, she's an interesting character because she never appears on stage. So everything we hear about Philomena, we hear from others. So unlike Sostrata and Bacchus, who gets a chance to speak to the audience directly, or rather reveal themselves and their identities directly, Philomena does not get that chance. All we can do is judge her or picture her through others. And again, we have Parmeno as one of the sources. He's saying, I'll move to the middle of it. His wife was modest and retiring as a lady ought to be. She bore without her husband's unkind and unfair treatment. So remember, now we have to look at this story from ancient Roman perspective. Okay, you might not agree to, I mean, there's a lot of things problematic about this play, the marriage itself, this whole idea of reconciliation. There's a lot of things problematic if you look at it from the 21st century perspective, because this is a sexual assault, and then we have a reconciliation between the assault and the victim. So problematic if you look at it from today's perspective. So I'm asking you to look at it from the Roman perspective and through the lens of Parmeno and only that part. So what a lady ought to be back then, what a wife ought to be back then. Okay. Yeah, looking through that. So according to Parmeno, Philomena is the perfect wife. And this behavior of her makes Pamphilus actually feel more inclined towards her rather than Bacchus a few months into their marriage. And he says he transferred his affections to Philomena from Bacchus because Philomena proved to be someone much more mild, let's say, or patient. But like I said, we don't see how Philomena actually is because she never appears on stage. And then the identity of Parmeno, the slave. So if you look at Parmeno, he plays a dominant role in pushing forward the plot. But as a person, we only see him as a slave of Pamphilus or the house of Pamphilus. So identity of Parmeno is completely molded by his identity as a slave. So slaves play a dominant role in most of Terence's plays. This is one of them, where they do contribute to the progression of the plot. But he doesn't have an identity of his own. He does what his master wants. He speaks for his master. He defends his master. He runs errands for the master. So his life is completely embedded in the life of the master. He doesn't say, oh, I don't feel like doing this, I'm going to do something else. Or he never says, I don't agree with Pamphilus. No, so his identity molded by his role as a slave. And again, so it's like Sostrata's identity molded by her role as a mother-in-law, but she breaks away from the stereotype and shows us that she's not this stereotype that Laches believes to be. But in the case of Parmeno, he lives in that mold. And then identity of Pamphilus. Now, Pamphilus is seen as this philandering youth kind of image is given at the beginning. Maybe not philandering is not the word. He has a mistress and he's faithful to the mistress. He does not want to, he only wants to marry Bacchus, but since he's a courtesan, that is not possible. So the whole fiasco is there. But later we are told that he agrees to a marriage to keep up with the social conventions. So he's not completely what you might call a radical personality. Let's say he's not completely breaking away. At a certain point, he has to bow down to the social norms. But then it takes more time for him to reconcile to the idea of marriage or the idea of only being with Philomena. And later, we realize that he has also sexually assaulted Philomena. So what I'm trying to say is the identity of Pamphilus, with the progression of the plot and the revelation of new information, his character keeps changing a little bit. So Sostrata is pretty straightforward. She goes on this line, I want to make this marriage successful. Bacchus, we start with a misconception, but she reveals herself to be this very dignified woman who's also having actual feelings for Pamphilus. She wants him to be happy. Pamphilus, on the other hand, with every new bit of information, we are on a journey. We see different sides to his personality. Even its encounter with Myrene, while he is refusing to accept Philomena back, he still agrees to help Myrene resolve the situation. So while he may have been the rapist, he's also now trying. I'm not condoning the fact that he's not accepting Philomena back, but in that setting, in that situation, he's trying to help Myrene also. So his character is rather complex, and his identity, the full extent of it, we have to wait all the way till the end to see the full extent of that character. So then moving on to the idea of recognition, I put here of characters and recognition by characters. So sometimes the characters recognize certain situations, and then we as the audience sometimes recognize the characters, the nuances of it, that is, okay. Moving on. So I already touched on this, but under the idea of recognition through physical objects, or physical recognition. You see something and you recognize. So that happens mainly with the ring. When Myrene and Philomena recognizes the ring, we have the resolution of the conflict or the plot. And then, so yeah, this is a quote that you can use if you're talking about that. And then there's the recognition of Philomena's quote-unquote loyalty, which happens for the characters, actually, particularly for Pamphilus. So here, why I put loyalty within inverted commas, because it's a concept that we can discuss, we can argue back and forth on. You can't just use it as a label. So loyalty of Philomena, in a few instances, one of which I have quoted here, where Parmeno says Philomena's loyalty to the marriage. Okay, so she's not, I mean, I'm not saying Philomena and Pamphilus has this really good understanding from the beginning, they don't, but Philomena is committed to the marriage, the idea of marriage. So that is why she's, she bears all of Pamphilus's conduct, because she's resolved to the idea of marriage itself, the idea of marriage, okay, not the relationship per se. So this is recognized by Pamphilus at a later point in time. Initially, he does not want to be with Philomena, but later he recognizes her commitment to this relationship, and then he also slowly starts reciprocating that commitment. We never see them at the end, like what happens at the end, how do they reconcile to this idea and the idea that they were a sexual assaulter and the victim. We never see that part because it's a comedy, it ends with a marriage, but we have this recognition in the middle. And then the recognition of Bacchus's character, what I meant here is the recognition of her actual affections for Pamphilus. It's not just about the sexual relationship, which a lot of people suspect it to be or think it to be. At the very end, if you read the stage directions of the play, you will see that Bacchus looks back and then she walks away. Like, you can see that she actually has feelings for Pamphilus, but she realizes that this institute of marriage and the family and social security that Philomena can give him cannot be given by Bacchus because of her situation. So this is something she says. His marriage hurts me, I don't deny, but thank God I feel that I did nothing to deserve it. So she's not part of the problem. She's part of the solution. So recognition of her actual emotions for us as the audience, and maybe for Pamphilus also. There's a typo in the title. I'm sorry about this. It should be Bacchus, not Bacchus's. Yeah, so recognition of her character. And then this also happens for Laches and Philippus. If you remember, when they're about to meet Bacchus for the first time, face to face, they're really nervous. So you can see Laches screaming at Sastrata and, completely bossing her around, being really mean. And then there is Bacchus who walks in. If you again read the stage directions, it says she's very dignified, she's very smart, and she's a woman of her own. So when she walks in, you can see Laches and Philippus, they're almost like boys. Laches is asking Philippus, will you stay with me? I can't speak to her alone. So it's almost boyish behavior when they're very nervous around this woman. The funny thing about it is, this is the same man who was screaming at his wife not too long ago. So recognition of the full capacity of Bacchus and the extent of Bacchus's character, that is also gradual for Laches and Philippus. They had this one idea of this woman, but when they encounter her, they are forced to change that idea. And the very fact that she agrees to go in and talk to Myrene and Philomena, that also would add to the idea of this person as Bacchus, and also maybe courtesans in general too. We'd never know. Terence never tells us that part. Anyway, and then this is also by Bacchus herself. She says, I've given back the wife with whom he believed he would never live again, and I removed the suspicions of his father and Philippus. So again, for us, we see Bacchus working towards a marriage. So this breaks. Now, remember, Terence is presenting this to a very conventional Roman audience, and he's destroying this idea of the stereotypical courtesan or the mistress or the maybe not a prostitute, mistress or courtesan, where they are jealous and vindictive. This is a different person who is actually helping this man succeed, reconcile with his wife and kind of help him have a good marriage. So recognition of the full extent of this particular character. Yes, and then we have Bacchus as an agent of information, let's say, at the very end. So at the almost, I think, the closing part of the play, Bacchus tells us about the story that happens before the opening of the play. How Pamphilus walks in to her place after assaulting Philomena. One day, he was drunk, it was dark, he doesn't know who the girl is, and he comes in, and then that whole situation, how he gives the ring, the whole idea of the ring. That part is revealed to the audience by Bacchus. So she acts also as an agent of this educator. The process of recognition for us. Recognition, I told you, like identity of Pamphilus is a thing that keeps unraveling throughout the play. And Bacchus helps that recognition of the full extent of Pamphilus's character by being the agent. She brings in information. And finally, the child as an heir. So again, we are talking about the Roman society, and like Ms. Supun previously mentioned, under Augustus and thereafter, the idea of family was very important, partly for inheritance and partly for this nuclear unit of the society. So to be a legitimate heir, to have a legitimate heir and to be a legitimate offspring was extremely important for both Roman citizenship and basically for their existence as a respectable Roman citizen. So there was a point at which where the legitimacy of this child was questioned, right? Because you don't know the father, this child is a product of a sexual assault. But then it's later, because it's a comedy and everything has to end well and clear and nice, the rapist turns out to be the husband of Philomena, who they later legally marry. So this child is born into that legal marriage. So we have an heir for Pamphilus, and the legitimacy of the child is secure. So this recognition, which happens with the recognition of the ring, is also important, and that happens at the towards the end of the play. So look at what Bacchus says. This is also a line from Bacchus. Philomena was the girl he attacked, and so her child is his own son. I'm glad he has found so much happiness through me. So I know you might have a lot of counter arguments to this situation and this statement. How he refused the child minutes ago when he thought it's someone else's child. When he himself has attacked a woman or assaulted a woman, why is he reluctant to accept this woman who's also been attacked or assaulted? So there's a lot of this situation, like I said, is complex. We can talk back and forth about it, but I'm purely focusing on the idea of recognition. And in this case, the child as a legitimate offspring of this marriage or this union. You can't say marriage, but union, and the legitimate heir of Pamphilus. So with that, we can look at the whole thing, the whole play in terms of identity and recognition. And like I said, the recognition is partial for some. So for example, Sostrata, she still, even at the end of the play, she does not know why Philomena moved out and why she is coming back. Mylene, of course, knows the story. And Parmeno knows half of it. And Parmeno is actually a loose end because Pamphilus says that he never had sex with Philomena. But Parmeno knows that there's a child now. So there's a loose end there. We don't know how Pamphilus is going to reconcile that. Terence does not go into that. The full story. Sostrata does not know most of it. So there's recognition by different degrees in the play. And the final part, this is something that Pamphilus says. He says, this play is not going to end in the usual fashion where everybody knows everything. In our case, the ones who ought to know, and the others who don't need to know shan't be told or know a thing. So that is, Terence is actually hinting at other writers here or other comedies here, where he says, in some comedies, everybody knows everything. So in my case, now I'm going to make it a partial recognition. And to wrap it up, there's this scholar, William S. Anderson. He actually calls it a privileged recognition. He has a discussion on this, a small paper on it. A privileged recognition of Pamphilus because he get to pick the people who knows and who does not. He's basically deciding, okay, you know, and you don't. He reveals Philomena and Bacchus and partial truths to Parmeno. The rest are in the dark as to what exactly happened. All they need to know is that this ends well. There's this happy marriage, a happy union, and a child also, and everything is well. So William S. Anderson, he calls it a privileged recognition. Privileged party is Pamphilus, who decides which parties are in light and which are in dark. So with that, I'll wrap up this conversation. If you have any questions, we'll talk about it at the end. So to sum it up, when we look at the whole idea of identity and recognition, you can talk about it in different angles. The recognition of the identity that leads to the resolution of the plot. That's one way to look at it. And then the identities of different characters. The identity that is given to them by other characters, usually the stereotype, and their revelation of the actual character, actual identity. And then recognition of different things by the audience and by the characters. So recognition of the loyalty, for example, of Philomena, the recognition of Bacchus's true extent of her character, all of that, and the recognition of physical material like the ring. So together you can talk about identity and recognition, and as several separate aspects, you can talk about it as well. So yes, that brings us to the end of this conversation. And yeah, like I said, if you have questions, we'll discuss it at the end. So with that, I think we can move on to the fifth and final session of the day, which is Aging Gracefully, Cicero on Old Age by Miss Supuneka Naik. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Amanti. Let me start by sharing slides. Okay, so again, I hope all of you can clearly see my slides and hear me clearly.
Yes, ma'am, you're clear.
Okay, wonderful. So let's start our discussion on this very interesting treatise of Cicero discussing old age and how he instructs us on aging gracefully. So let's move on to the discussion. Right, now aging, which is of course the main theme of Cicero's discussion, is, as all of you will agree, a very natural process, a process that is inevitable. Cicero agrees and starts on that note, saying this is something that we have to go through, whether we like it or not. However, it's also problematic. And if you look into a number of researches that are conducted by various NGOs, individuals, as well as governmental organizations, we know that this is a time or this is a phenomena that is problematic, not just for the individual, but also for the society. In other words, it is becoming, the aging population is clearly becoming a problem to the society, to countries. And this is mainly because, along with age, to mention the obvious, issues of physical and mental health, financial difficulties, dependency, that inevitably come with aging. And not just that, you have a host of other problems like sense of abandonment, loneliness, depression, fear, sense of hopelessness and helplessness, feeling that you are completely and utterly dependent on someone. So because of all these corpus of negative feelings, old age ends up becoming a burden, a true burden for the individual as well as to the society. Now, it is in such a context that we encounter this beautiful idea of aging gracefully. So if aging is in fact inevitable, why not try to age with grace? So let's get to know what is aging gracefully is about. So a lot of people actually compare this to a fine wine. As you know, wine gets better with time, right? It becomes sweeter and more, it becomes richer with time. So like a fine wine that becomes richer and richer with age, how can we gracefully age? So this is actually a modern concept that addresses or choose to address some of the key challenges of the aging population. And this is all about helping the individual to come to terms with old age and the process of aging. And finally, to assist the social integration of the elderly in a way that is ultimately beneficial, not just for the individual, but also to the society. So, as I said, this is a modern concept. A lot of sociologists, anthropologists talk about aging gracefully, because in modern times, the aging population has posed, as I said, a number of challenges to countries. So it is a very modern concept, a modern take on aging. However, if you would clearly read through the subtext of Cicero's treatise, you would see that before thousands of years, Cicero had actually talked about aging gracefully through his treatise. So let's find out more about this. Okay, so I think Cicero doesn't need a lot of introduction. He's certainly an individual that dominated the political landscape of the Republican era, the late Republican era. And he was a man of many callings, an active politician, a political theorist, a very successful lawyer, I should say, an orator, a writer, a scholar, and a very well-known philosopher. So let's see what Cicero has to say about old age. So in Latin, this treatise is known as De Senectute, on old age. This is actually composed in 44 BC rather, when Cicero himself was about 62 years of age. And this is a moral philosophical treatise, which is actually presented in the form of a dialogue, a very interesting dialogue between key individuals, historical figures that we find in Roman society. Marcus Scipio the Africanus, Gaius Laelius, and this actually deals with the theme of old age and aging. So what are the impressions of old age? How do we face old age? That seems to be the discussion, right? Between these individuals, Cato, Scipio, and Gaius. So let's move on. Now, it's quite interesting why Cicero uses Cato, the elder. Why him? That's definitely a question which we need to ask ourselves, because Cato, as you would know, is the main spokesman of the dialogue. So Cicero himself says that you would actually hear my views on old age through the lips of Cato. So why Cato? So actually Cato is supposedly 84 years old at the time of this conversation. And he's extremely well known as a very patriotic and a very stern moralist. Is quite renowned for his sense of virtue and strict integrity. And for that very reason, he was greatly admired by Cicero. And he actually was featured in several of Cicero's philosophical dialogues. We meet him as an important spokesperson. in most of Cicero's dialogues. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he makes appearances in about 60 instances, so that's a lot. So it is quite apparent that Cicero had actually admired Cato the Elder, Cato the Censor, as he's known, quite profoundly. And he makes the perfect spokesman in this instance, because he epitomizes the ideals that Cicero seeks to project through this treatise. So he's kind of like the embodiment, the living embodiment of, the advice or the reflections that Cicero projects across in his treatise. So especially when it comes to advising, when moralizing, because this is, as I said, it's a moral treatise. So when it comes to moralizing, it's very important where the moral advice comes from, because it should be someone that knows what he's talking about, or at least someone who exemplifies the things that he preaches, right? As the saying goes, someone who walks the talk, right? And Cato the Elder certainly appears to be someone like that, and that actually makes him the perfect spokesperson for Cicero. Right. Now, Cicero, now let's move on to the treatise itself. He begins by pointing out two guiding principles. I think this clearly reflects on Cicero himself as well. So the first guiding principle that he mentions is philosophy, right? And this is what he says about philosophy. No praise then is too great philosophy, which enables this period in her obedient disciples' lives, like every other period, to be lived without anxiety. So, as you know, the Stoic philosophy and certain ideals that the Stoic philosophy embodies is the foundation upon which the ideas are built upon. So that's why it's quite understandable why Cicero points out philosophy as one of the guiding principles. Now, when it comes to the next guiding principle, he says it's nature. Now, in Latin, because remember this is written in Latin, original. So in Latin, this is natura, nature. So it has a very profound meaning when it comes to philosophy, especially the Stoic philosophy. It means how things should be, the natural order of things. I think the word that comes very closely to natura in singular is dharma, right? So when we take this word dharma, dharmata, it actually resonates with the Latin connotation of the word natura. So obviously, the Stoics believe that no one should go beyond nature, on the natural order of things. That simply doesn't work. So here, obviously, old age is looked upon as something which is natural and therefore something that needs to be accepted. So the quotation reads, as I regard nature as the best guide. So this reflects on Cicero as a philosopher, particularly the Stoic ideals that are there. So I regard nature as the best guide. I follow and obey her as a divine being. Now, since she has planned all the earlier divisions of our lives excellently, she's not likely to make a bad playwright's mistake of skipping the last act, which is old age. And the last act was inevitable. There had to be a time of withering, of readiness to fall, like the ripeness which comes to the fruits of the trees and of the earth. But a wise man will face this prospect with resignation, for resistance against nature is as pointless as the battle of the giants against the gods. I repeat, resistance against nature is as pointless as the battles of the giants against the gods. So since natural old age is seen as something as a part of natural order of things, it's pointless to go against it. So the key is to accept and adjust ourselves accordingly. So the question is, how can we do that? So moving on. Now the treatise is very interestingly structured, where Cicero actually brings certain common allegations, common complaints against old age, but at the same time argues that these allegations really don't, they're not actually valid. So let's look at some of these allegations and how Cicero tries to refute them. So the first allegation is old age draws one away from active pursuits, which is true enough. Old age leads to the decline of physical strength. Old age deprives one of all physical pleasures. Old age is not far removed from death. Now, it's very important to appreciate this in the context of the Greek and Roman cultures, because when it comes to Greek and Roman cultures, both these cultures celebrated life. These are two cultures that always celebrated life in all its vitality, where your physical strength becomes an essential part of your virility, your personality, your manliness, and who you are basically. So in a culture where physical strength and everything that is related to carnal enjoyment is celebrated, it's of course quite understandable that people look at old age in an extremely negative way, because as you know, old age deprives person of all that, right? So this is clearly a new perception of old age, or an invitation to look into old age, reconstruct old age, our perception of old age in a way that would help us to get through it. So let's look at what Cicero has to say about these different allegations and how he counter argues. Okay, so we come to the first allegation: old age draws one from active pursuits. So Cicero counters the argument by saying, yes, of course, old age draws one from active pursuits like, athletics, things like that. But then there are other pursuits that one can engage in. You don't have to focus on what you can't do, because there are millions of other things that you can do during old age, like intellectual employments. So, as you would see, Cicero clearly argues here. People who declare that there are no activities for old age are speaking beside the point. It's like saying that the pilot has nothing to do with sailing a ship because he leaves others to climb the mast and run along the gangways and work the pumps while he himself sits quietly in the stern holding the rudder. So he takes this metaphor from, a seafaring, a nautical metaphor, and explains that, there are things that people could do, important things that people could do during old age. So to continue, he may not be doing what the younger men are doing, but his contribution is much more significant and valuable than theirs. Great deeds are not done by strength or speed or physique. They are the products of thought and character and judgment, and far from diminishing, such qualities actually increase with age. So can you see how Cicero, brings the argument to not just to say that, certain activities for old age are there, but then they can be done well, right? So it's quite interesting how he argues the counter. And this is another example. So old age, you see, far from being sluggish and feeble, is really very lively and perpetually very active and still busy with the pursuits of earlier years. Some people never stop learning, however old they are. You can see Solon, for example, boasting in his poem that while he grows old, he continues to learn something new every day. Okay, now we come to the second allegation against old age. Old age leads to the decline of physical strength. Again, Cicero says, yes, but then he has two counter arguments for this. One, he says the decline of physical strength is not a fault of old age. Rather, it is the result of a youth spent in excessive pleasures. So one of the things that you would note is that for Cicero, a happy old age is firmly established. The foundation is firmly established in youth. So without a youth spent in moderation, there won't be happy old age. So that's something you need to remember, and it's connected with the first counter argument that he makes, that the decline of physical strength is actually not a fault of old age, but it's a result of a youth spent in excessive pleasure. Secondly, though physical strength may decline, Cicero says, during old age, other faculties are strengthened. I think there is a typo. Yeah, so it should be, though physical strength may decline during old age, it strengthens other faculties, I think. yeah, sorry about that. So moving on to the next one. So this quotation is very evident of how he argues of the first argument, because he says, in any case, when failures of bodily vigor do occur, they are to be blamed upon youthful dissipations more often than upon old age. And a youth spent in immoderate debauchery transmits to later years a body that is already worn out. So he certainly doesn't blame old age for this, but rather a badly spent youth. Next, this is another very interesting quotation which supports the second allegation, or the counter argument for the allegation. In short, enjoy the blessings of strength while you have it, and have no regrets when it has gone, any more than young men should regret the end of boyhood, or those approaching middle age lament the passing of youth. Life's course is inevitable. So this is nature, this is natural. Nature has one path only, and you cannot travel along it more than once. So every stage of life has its own characteristics. Both boys are feeble, youths in their prime are aggressive, middle-aged men are dignified, old people are mature. Each one of these qualities is ordained by nature for harvesting in due season. So we can again and again see how the guiding principle of nature is reflected through the advice that he gives. So moving on to the third allegation. Age deprives one of all physical pleasures. That's true, right? Because all the things that you enjoy, drinking and other kinds of carnal pleasures, they don't excite you. They don't, please you as much as they did when, you were young. True. But then you look at Cicero's counter argument. He says, yes, this is true, but actually this is a great freedom rather than a deprivation. Being free from all these physical pleasures, it's actually a freedom. Don't think of it as a deprivation, but think of it as a freedom. And secondly, he says, there are other pleasures that one can enjoy during old age. Just like there are, activities that are suitable for old age, there are, pleasures of old age, like conversation and farming. So here it says, as you would see in this quotation, next we come to the third allegation against old age. This was its deficiency in sensual pleasures, but if age really frees us from youth's most dangerous failings, then we are receiving a most blessed gift. Right? And then again he says, now, why have I gone into all this? To prove to you that if logic and intelligence did not already enable us to avoid lustful pleasures, we ought to feel very grateful to old age for removing the desire to do what is wrong. For such feelings cloud a man's judgment, obstruct his reasoning capacity, and blind his intelligence. So these are the dangers of excessive pleasures. But so if old age takes away such pleasures, which would result in all those things that we just mentioned, Isn't that a good thing? Cicero asks. So for such a beings cloud a man's judgment, obstruct his reasoning capacity, and blind his intelligence. Be present, and a good life becomes impossible, right? So again, let me remind you at this point, Cicero's advice on old age, his views on old age, actually falls into the greater discussion, the bigger dialogue on the good life. Because this became one of the most important lines of discourse in ancient philosophy. How could philosophy teach you to lead a good life? So I think that needs to be remembered, that should be there in the back of your minds when you read Cicero's ideas on old age. This is not just a very focused discussion on old age itself, but rather a part, a branch, if you will, of a larger discussion on leading a good life, right? Okay, so with that, let's move on to the next quotation. So here also we see Cicero's argument. So why then do I have so much to say about pleasures of this kind? Because the weakening of temptation to indulge in them, far from supplying a pretext to approach old age, is a reason for offering it the most cordial compliments. Age has no banquets, no tables piled high, no cups filled again and again. So it all avoids drunkenness and indigestion and sleepless nights. So that's the positive. So focusing on the pleasures of old age, look at what he has to say. Personally, I'm so fond of conversation. Conversation is seen as one of the perks of old age. Fruitful conversation, that is, that I even enjoy afternoon parties. At these, I like meeting not only my contemporaries, of whom very few remain, but yours too, young people, and you yourselves. I actually feel grateful to old age because this has increased my enthusiasm for conversation, but eliminated the desire for food and drink. However, since nature does perhaps authorize material pleasure within limits, the key being within limits, I must not give the appearance of declaring war on them outright. So he says, it doesn't have to be that you completely, give away your pleasures, but you indulge them, but in moderate measures. So it continues. I myself appreciate our long established formalities of appointing Toastmasters for such entertainments and of starting the conversation at the head of the table. So this is a very beautiful picture about, people enjoying old age. I enjoy cups that are small enough to bedew rather than drench, as Xenophon puts it in his symposium. And I like my drinks well cooled in summer and warmed in winter by sunshine. Every day I take the meal with my neighbors. We talk on all manner of subjects and prolong the party as late as possible into the night. So it's a beautiful picture depicting the pleasures of old age. Right, now we come to the final allegation against old age, which is the most serious, I think, and that is old age is not far removed from death, right? Death is omnipresent. Now, Cicero starts by saying, well, death is omnipresent to anyone, even for a young person. But let's keep that fact aside. There is actually no reason to fear death. There is actually no reason to fear death, especially if one has lived well. So, as it goes, he says, when a man is old, well, there can obviously be no doubt that it, meaning death, is near. Yet, if during his long life he has failed to grasp that death is of no account, he is unfortunate indeed. There are two alternatives. Either death completely destroys human souls, in which case it is negligible, or it removes the soul to some place of eternal life, in which case its coming is greatly to be desired. So there can be no third possibility. Then after death, I shall either lack happiness or even positively happy. I have nothing whatsoever to fear. So this is clearly inspired by his Stoic philosophical beliefs that if you lived according to nature, if you live a good life, there is absolutely no reason to fear death. And he actually looks at it in a very logical manner too, because he says there are only two alternatives. Either it eradicates, death eradicates existence entirely, in which case there's absolutely nothing to fear, or else it takes you to an eternal life, which is something to be desired. So in both cases, since there's no third alternative, there's absolutely no reason to fear death. So this is how he further explains that there may be some sensation in the process of dying, because it's common knowledge that the main thing that we fear is, the process of dying. Right? I don't know if you see the thin line that separates the two, death and the process of dying, which is thought to be painful, right? So after that, it is true that the sensation in the process of dying is there, but it is a fleeting one. So it's momentary, especially to the old. So after death, the sensation is either pleasant or there is none at all, as we discussed in the earlier quotation. But this should be taught on from your youth up, so that we may be indifferent to death. And without this thought, no one can be in a tranquil state of mind. For it is certain that we must die, and for aught we know, this very day. Okay, so this is how Cicero tries to argue against the common allegations against death. Right? So let's take Cicero's attitude towards death, or Cicero's take on old age. Now, this clearly involves attitudinal change, where Cicero prompts one to look beyond the negative connotations of old age. And actually, rather than focusing on the negative, what is lacking or what one would miss during old age, he wants us to focus more on the quote and unquote benefits of old age. And the interesting thing here is that he encourages the individual to use the benefits of old age in a way that would serve the society. I think that's very interesting, because being a moral philosophical treatise, you would think that Cicero would have a very, what's the word I'm looking for? He would have a very isolated view of the individual, kind of this idea that you retire to your old age. So you look at old age with, a kind of a moral composure, which, which induce you to retire from active life, that kind of thing. But that's actually not there in Cicero, but rather he shows these old people as very active members and very useful members of the society, even in their old age. Their usefulness, their value to the society keeps on growing. So I think that's a very valuable thing that Cicero makes us focus on, because he says at the end, old age doesn't require you to retire, become an outcast of the society, and to, become isolated to the point that you live this existence, lonely existence at that, until you die. No, far from that. He shows with a lot of examples how old people could be very effectively incorporated into the society, how they can still, in spite of old age, they can still be very useful, active citizens of the community. So yeah, so it clearly such an attitudinal change on the part of the individual as well as the society would lead to the efficient integration of the old into the society. So, as we were talking about the benefits of old age Cicero says old age has its own appropriate weapons, namely the study and the practice of decent, enlightened living. Do all you can to develop these activities all your life, and as it draws to a close, the harvest you reap will be amazing. That is partly for the very important reason that you can go on living in this fashion until your dying day. Besides, there is great satisfaction in the knowledge of a life well spent and the memory of many things well done. So that is actually the harvest that you reap in old age. So finally, how does Cicero want us to deal with old age? How does he instruct us to age gracefully? Three important things. These are extremely important if we are to, spend old age happily. First is, of course, disciplining the body and mind. That should come from youth. As I said before, if you spend in the immoderate pursuit of all these pleasures in your youth, then you can't expect to have a happy old age. So disciplining the body as well as your mind is definitely a requirement. And then you have to have that appropriate moral conduct that kind of develops through the disciplining of your body and mind. And then again, based on that, you can develop the kind of the right attitude towards old age. So it's all about developing that right attitude, looking at, what we see is an image that is being a result of years and years of, generations thinking, right? So Cicero clearly wants to deconstruct it and, create it in a very new way. So it's quite interesting to observe that Cicero's views on old age are both idealistic as well as pragmatic. So as Montaigne says, they're so idealistic, beautifully idealistic, that he even gives one an appetite for growing old. When you read what he says, it makes you feel, okay, I want to grow old now, right? So it's so idealistic that it really makes you grow an appetite for old age. But then it's not simply idealistic, it's also very pragmatic. Because it really gives you practical guidance in facing old age, as we said earlier, to how to age gracefully. So he actually goes beyond supplying just a consolation for old age, because if you notice, that's how he starts the treatise. Saying that what he expects is a kind of a consolation for old age. But he goes beyond that and tells us, no, it's not simply a matter of consoling yourself during old age, it's thriving during old age, because you can truly thrive during old age, right? So finally, let me say that the inspiration for this comes from Greece. You see that Cicero has taken a lot from certain dialogues, in sense, certain conversations on old age, from people like Cicero, from people like Plato, from Aristotle. Certain Aristotelian echoes could be found, and then even Stoics. So the Greek inspiration is certainly there, but the treatise is quite uniquely Roman because it caters to that Roman, society and social expectations of being extremely active, not just in terms of public life, but also, in civic life, which includes, socializing, meeting with friends, political engagements. So Cicero certainly shows that, you don't need to say goodbye to all those things in your old age. You can still engage in all these activities that you cherish, but you simply need to look at it in a different way. So I'm going to wrap up my talk with one of my personal favorite lines taken from John Keats' To Autumn. Where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Think not of them. Thou hast thy music too. So it's futile to look for the music of youth, because old age has its own brand of music too, right? So if you worry too much about, what you miss during, of youth, you will be missing the beauty of old age, and that's what Cicero guides us on. Okay, so thank you so much. I think if you have any questions, I'm sure you might have, we can address them on in our discussion in a minute. But yeah, I hope you understood everything that we discussed. And yeah, okay. Amanti, over to you then. Thank you.